This is the Biz News Podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
It's called Faction, and entrepreneur and author Bob Kaplan uses the writing style that combines fiction with fact for a new approach to leading and evolving. Change is hard, he says. The challenge is to get whatever is blocking change out of the way, first by identifying the inside-your-head blockages. Bob Kaplan tells more in this Biz News interview. Bob, you've talked to business and organization leaders over the years, probably countless, although you might actually have a Rolodex of them. How many of them have pretty much similar obstacles to getting to the point where they can change? And if so, what are those obstacles and how'd you get over them?
You know, there's a continuum, Doug, of open to input, about yourself on the one end, and self-protective, let's say, on the other end. You know, and everybody's got a setting on that continuum. Now, so that matters a lot to how they are open, how they work with us, how they take in data about themselves.
And once you recognize that, how do you get them to change? How do they accept that? Because people just don't like change.
They don't. Well, the types we work with are senior people. They're high achievers. They want to keep getting better, keep raising their game. So they got that motivation going for them. That's one thing. If they come to trust us in two senses, believe that we know what we're doing, and also trust our motives in this sense that we're there to help them, that makes a difference. If the conversations and the feedback report are confidential, their property, that makes a difference. That's psychological safety. Now, we do tie back into the organization. The two of us will sit with the person above them and brief them, but there's no back door. So those are some of the factors that lead a person to let down their guard.
How do people come in contact with you in the first place? Do they look you up and say, I need help? Or is there a board of directors saying, you better help this guy before we throw him out on the road?
Some of the latter, a lot of it's word of mouth, as you would imagine. Uh, uh, yeah, somebody hears that we're good, they've got a need, they call up, and maybe there's a match.
What's been the toughest thing that you've had to overcome in helping leaders get to higher levels?
This is going back a while, but so my own need to achieve, right? I'm wanting, in working with this person, for them to get somewhere. That my need early on, I needed to recognize that I had that need and sit on it, channel it into helping them improve. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. And that sounds like a pretty hard thing to do for anybody.
Well, I'm a big believer in self-mastery. Can you govern yourself? And I require that of myself.
Bob, how did you get into this line of work?
I even as a kid with a younger brother who sort of got off on the wrong foot, I instinctively wanted to help him. And then in college, I got a side job, tutoring high school dropouts, and then took a full-time job after graduating college, and I realized I didn't know anything about change, about helping people change. So I looked around and found a graduate program. It happened to be an organizational behavior that was practical as well as academic, and that's how I got on my way.
Lucky to find such a program at the college level. As I recollect, very few back in the day were headed that direction.
Yeah. Have you had this happen in your life, Doug? Somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, Bob, in this case, hey, Bob, have you heard of this program? I hadn't. He said, I recommend it to you. There's a master's program.
Well, Bob, you have written a couple of books, the latest of which I see stuck on a shelf right behind you. For
All
our
right.
listeners who are not watching this, it's on a shelf right behind his shoulder there. Tell us about it.
So, for the first time in my writing career, I've done a lot of professional writing, articles, books. I decided to attempt fiction to bring to life what it's like to lead, what it's like to try to improve your leadership. And from a dead stop, I learned to write fiction. And that the book is a result of it. There are 8 stories. They're based on real people, but like historical fiction, a lot of the scenes are imagined. You have to use your imagination. That was a big switch for me as well. Usually it's facts and data and concepts and advice and so on. Uh, I learned to write fiction with the help of a first-rate editor who worked with me on each of these stories, and I and improved the stories, but also taught me how to write fiction.
We talked to so many writers on these podcasts over the decades. Good grief, it's been that several decades now. Uh, and everybody has a different way of going about writing. As you settled into it, what was your routine?
Usually in the morning when you're fresh. Um, it's That's one thing. The other thing is I like to write every day if I can, if my client work permits it, because then it's in my mind and then thoughts come to mind. I know how to work that dialogue.
But
So yes.
tell us more about this book. This, if it's fiction, why should we believe it?
Well, it's nonfiction. It's a hybrid. It's fiction, but it's also based on real people. Okay, so in fact, there's a new category I've run across: faction,
I'm
fact,
sorry, FACTION?
tion,
It's
based
not a
fiction.
typo. It's a word.
I thought it was a typo, and the person wrote back saying, "No, it's a new category: fiction based on fact, like historical fiction, right?"
Well, that's very interesting. I have not read any factions that, to my knowledge, but perhaps it's out there.
Well, I'd be happy to send you a copy, a signed copy of my book, and give you the opportunity.
Well, that would be always appreciated. But tell us more about your favorite story in that book.
Um, they're all favorites. It's like my children, and I don't play favorites.
You have no favorite child around the Thanksgiving table.
No, and that's another sort of self mastery thing. There's some of my kids are more like me, and like one of them is less like me, and my wife actually said to me, I require you to invest in him as much as the like types. But back to your question. So we've seen this in life. The leader lost his father at an early age, and he was the younger of the 2 siblings, but his sister sort of fell apart, and so you know what happens. He took on a sense of responsibility way earlier than normally, and that put its stamp on his leadership, his sense of responsibility. You could not fault it, but it knew no bounds. And there are side effects to that, right? He's a senior person with senior people on his team. They don't want him to do their job for them, for example. The other thing is he was so responsible that his work-life balance wasn't in balance. And in fact, um, I can read you an excerpt right now, a brief excerpt from that story.
That'd be great. Do you mind?
I don't mind, and I appreciate your inviting me to do it. So he was just about to hear whether he got a big promotion, and work is always on his brain. And so the day before this fateful decision, he said to his wife, "Geez, there's no so much writing on this." She says, "As if I didn't know. I detest that place." The words exploded out of her mouth. "Detest? That bad? I had no idea," he said. "Of course you didn't," she said. "But hasn't the place been good to us?" he said. She waved that aside. "But we're able to send the kids to private school, and look where we live." "You can justify it all you want," she said. "Your life's out of whack, way out of whack." He says, "Well, don't we have to make sacrifices in life? Would you please get off of it?" She said, "You're trying my patience." He says, "I can't do anything right." She says, "Neither can I. I let this build up, and now the dam has burst."
Well, that's a pretty darn good piece of fiction writing there, or faction.
Thank you.
And you do a great job reading it too.
Thank you so much.
Where can our listeners get more and viewers get more information about you? Bob, do you have a website they can go to?
Yes, it's our firm's name is Kaplan DeVries, DEV as in Victor, RIES. And the website is kaplandevries.com.
Uh, Before we get into a final thought or two, any other advice you might want to give would-be writers? You said something about editing.
I think it's good in most cases to get help when in writing an article or a book, especially if you haven't written before. A thought consultant uh, uh, help you figure out what the point of the thing you're writing is. Also, help you with composition and the fine points of what you're writing. So, Doug, I would like to say one thing about what grappling means before your.
Oh, sure, of course.
So, people try to change, and they often fail. And there's something in the way. What is that? And they may know and they may not know what that is. So, grappling is about putting your finger on what that is and grappling with it, getting out of the way so you can see your way clear to changing. I can give you the simplest story. I was consulting to somebody, head of engineering, and she needed to terminate somebody on her team, but she wasn't able to bring herself to do it. She was procrastinating. So I said, "What's in the way?" And she said, "Fear." And I think it was concern for how this person, a family man, would be affected by losing his job. So I said to her, uh, "This fear, what represents this fear? What could represent it? A person, place, or thing?" She said, "An elephant." This is it. She's in India, and I said, "So what do elephants eat?" She said, "Well, bamboo. Can you imagine a bamboo tree off to the side?" She said, "I can." "Can you imagine the elephant moving over to eat some of those bamboo leaves?" She said, "I can." "Can you see your way clear to letting this person go?" "I can." So,
Keep that in mind. Bob, you've given us a lot to think about. But do you have a final thought, something we haven't brought up?
yes, um, managers uh, getting feedback think that the negative feedback is what has value for them. It's what they can do something about. And we have learned that's the positive feedback that rivals the negative feedback in developmental value. And it's a chance to boost your confidence if you can take it in. Often people underestimate how good they are across the board or in some respect, like how smart they are. And uh, the thing is that there's often something in the way of drinking in the positives. And you know what that thing often is, Doug, intuitively? What would get in the way when somebody gets a compliment and they deflect it or they squirm? What's going on?
They're afraid to accept compliments, and it could be for a lot of reasons, but probably something they learned when they were growing up to be deferential to compliments.
You got it. How about humble humility? We have that drilled into our brains, and it gets in the way. So for the person to get an uptick in their confidence from the positive feedback, they have to grab hold of that humility, excess humility, move that aside. And with one of the senior people I worked with, he was able to do it over the several months. And then he said, Bob, I'm more confident and I'm more comfortable with myself.
You've been listening to the Biz News Podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@biznews.com. That's bizgnus.com. Thanks for listening.